Hi, I'm Zahir. Another discussion today on matters of technology design. So, I'm going to talk about so-called bright ideas. Ideas that work great in some circumstances, but not in others, and the implementation of the wrong bits of tech on the wrong bits of design. So, recently, driving a brand new car, and the experience was marred by a particular feature of the interface. Don't get me wrong, touch screens in the right circumstances are great. On an iPhone, where you're looking at the screen, knowing where to press and you want feedback and instant accessibility to the interface, touching the screen of the iPhone with your fingers, it makes perfect sense. An appropriate use of a touchscreen display or a touch sensitive button. However, there are circumstances in which case a touch method of input is definitely not appropriate or the best use of technology. So let me explain, going back to this car I was driving. Sat navigation screen in front, perfect. It's great. You press the buttons, you can press the buttons on the screen and it will type in a postcode and it adapts to whatever's on the display. Great. The display of a screen is often changing, so touch sensitivity makes sense, so that the place that you need to touch to get the desired input is responsive depending on the screen that's on display or the option that's on display. You might want to type in a postcode, you might want to press the OK button, and all these things are going to change place, and you'll be looking at the screen at the time. However, buttons, physical buttons that you can press and have tactile feedback, have their place and are very important, and even safer in some circumstances, I would say, than touch sensitive buttons. So driving this car, changing the gear, radio comes on, changing the gear, screen display changes, and at first I thought, where's the glitch happening? And what I realized was that the super sensitive, touch sensitive buttons on the center console were being triggered every time I brushed my hand past them. If it was a physical button, this wouldn't be happening. It would expect me to exert some degree of force. But a touch sensitive button, it barely requires a brush, for us to instigate the action, the desired action. And this is one massive issue. Ferrari are now even putting touch sensitive buttons on their steering wheel. If you look at the Ferrari Roma, I mean, the testers would agree with me, the testers who have road tested this car, it's a potentially flawed decision, because you want to be able to drive safely and not distracted by not knowing if a button's been depressed or if it's been accidentally brushed over and depressed and actioned. There's danger in that. There's a reason that buttons work better in some circumstances, because most of the time we rely on some degree of muscle memory to trigger an action. If we know, for example, where the heater button is on a car, or the AC button, or that sort of thing, we will inherently very quickly learn where it is placed, be able to press that button, and we'll get the feedback we need from the action. We'll know where the button is, we know it's been pressed. The possibility of accidentally pressing a touch sensitive button is too great for it to be implemented in critical functions. Wouldn't necessarily say a heating function is critical, but it might be critical, say for example for the windscreen demister. It may be critical for changing modes on the steering wheel to get from normal mode of driving to sports mode of driving, or traction control on, traction control off. These little things are really probably not best suited to a simple touch sensitive button. Ultimately, we can learn where a button is placed press it, get that feedback. So what are the arguments that perhaps these companies who are implementing touch-sensitive buttons using to use them in perhaps inappropriate settings? Primarily, I wonder if this is aesthetics, because sometimes it just looks cool to have a uniform block. Sometimes it just looks cool to have a uniform block whereby actions light up when you press them, or you can, disguise a surface as being fully smooth that actually hides control. So there's some aesthetic reasons for it, but sometimes practicality must override aesthetics, and practicality and aesthetics can go hand in hand together. I mean, look at the iPhone. It uses a good combination. You've got touch sensitive display, but there's a physical on button and physical volume buttons and a physical switch for turning on silent or loud mode. There's reasons for these decisions, and I think some decisions are counterintuitive to logic and common sense. Going back to this idea about bright ideas, it might seem like a bright idea. Oh, great, let's put the latest touch-sensitive display technology into a steering wheel. It will look great, it will look cool. But I disagree that it's a practical and safe application of that technology. A physical button would have been more appropriate and safer. What other reasons are there that companies may be implementing this? Someone may have had just a bright idea, let's just put in a touch-sensitive display. And then without thinking through the consequences, it's done. Decision has been made, it's gone through every process of design, and by the time it's gone through prototyping, it's probably too late to change back that initial decision that may not have been thought through. And I think this is where, as consumers, we will suffer when there are some generations of technology that of technology that are behind practicality because of poorly thought out, poorly thought through decisions. So this is really also an appeal to manufacturers that if they're going to implement technologies that seem aesthetically pleasing, cool, progressive, to think through the consequences, the implications for safety, for for ease of use, before they're implemented into actual physical products. I mean, I hope this feedback is considered by these manufacturers, because really, I am a little bit disappointed, and it's influencing the choice of future purchases about the inefficient and incorrect use of some technologies into design. Thanks very much for listening to my thoughts.